Right, so I have, as I said I was going to do, painted using some Gunze super metallic, super fine silver over a 0 resin primer, the interior of this Caudron. The silver's gone quite nicely. It's shown up that there's not much, but there's nothing really to do to this beyond some detail paint work. Instrument panels have been cut from the brass fret. They are black now, and they are just, oops, where did he go? Where did he go? I went there. Technology grand. They just need fitting to the little films that came in the kit with them, which I've already cut out. So we're making some progress. That was they were stuck on that skewer with a little bit of white tack putty tack, as you'd sort of kind of expect. Now I want to put a little bit of tone in here. As I said before, there's not going to be much in the way of this visible, but I'm not going to cut corners just because I'm not going to be able to see it. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some tone into the silver, and we're going to use a grey panel lining. These Tamiya panel washes are great. In the grey range they do a dark grey, medium grey and a light grey. I'm going to go with the medium just because I don't want it to be too stark. If I'd have gone with black it would have been much too much, I think. I'll put the right glasses on, I can see what I'm doing then. Now this one's not been used for a couple of weeks, so it needs a really good shake. There we go. And as you can see, it's a good wet wash. Now I used to use the Airfix ones. I found out they had quite a restricted shelf life though. These Tamiya panel line washes, I've had these since they were first announced. I bought them as a set from Taiwan, I believe, via Evil Bay. So as soon as they were available, all the colours, that is, I'm on my second bottle of the black now. Yeah, they're just grand. They do job like. So what we're going to do is we're going to just dip it into the panels nice and gently, nothing too heavy. We're not blathering it on, but what we want to do is just to get that little bit of a highlight into that. Let's zoom this in quickly. A little bit better. We don't want too much on the brush. We're putting in little shades into these areas just to show some depth. Now you are going to say, but Ian, you can't see any of that. And the answer is no, you can't, but we'll all know it's not there if we don't do it. I'm going to do some detail paint work on the throttle levers in a minute. I believe they're metal with brown knobs. I might be wrong. We'll try that. Again, just gently into what you're going to do is hold it against the detail, let the paint flow, or let the wash flow, rather than trying to force it into there. You see, just a dab is all it needs. You see some people blather it all on with the brush. No, unless you're trying to really hide or apply a tone, that's not really the idea. Just do that. If you've got too much of it, the Tamiya brand cotton buds, which are now becoming widely available, thankfully, in the UK, as are all these. This is apparently now available from the UK import of this stuff, which is just the business. I've been waiting for that since they announced it. Really pleased with that. So we're just putting depth into this detail, just to give it a bit of a chance to show, really. Some beautifully moulded tread plates on these, where the rudder pedals would have been had I not chopped them off, so that in the hope that I wouldn't have had to chop up Mademoiselle Cohn's legs. Unfortunately, on the evidence of what we've got so far, I am going to have to chop up her legs, which is disappointing. I am a put it away modeler, I'm afraid. Things get put away when they're done with. Now, for detail work like this, what you just normally have to pick up a bottle of paint. Now, I believe that the easiest paint to paint detail with at the minute that I can get hold of, that holds colour and everything, are these little Revel aqua colours. Now, I don't usually use water-based acrylics, but these are great. These are actually brushable, so you can do fine work and you can do seat covers and things with them. I mainly use them for painting the little figures that go in my aircraft models. They're great for that. The dark brown, very usable. So for this, because I'm doing fine work and I don't want to be loading a paint brush up, I'm just going to use a cocktail stick and dip it. Just put a little bit on the end of each of those throttle levers, just to give me an indication of a separate colour. Now, I'm also going to do the end of that lever there, because I'm presuming there would have been a handle on it, and also on this lever here, because again, I'm presuming there would have been a knob on the end of that. You know, they say a wizard's staff has a knob on the end. Bit of black as well. 302 satin black is very useful stuff, provided you pick up the right pot. Would always be the last one you pick up. There you go. And shock horror, I'm going to reuse the same cocktail stick. My word, sacrilege, I know, but there you go. A little bit on the end of each of the control columns. Now, the seats apparently were a dark grey colour, so I'm going to use anthracite from the Revell range. When I pick up the right jar. Difficulty of wearing modelling glasses, because anything further than about 8 inches away from me it's blurred, so it's all a little bit wonky. Now this stuff is lovely. Now you can thin these with a bit of water if you want them to be a little more brushable. I don't think they necessarily need it. Just an old flat brush. Needs replacing that one actually. That was a bit heavy, but there you go. Now, I'm not going to profess that I'm the world's best modeler. I don't work like that. These aircraft models of mine are built solely for my purposes, my enjoyment. I'm not going to spend forever hyper detailing them. What I do like them to do is look all right. And these models of mine, these aircraft models of mine, look okay. It's a standard that's even, and I'm happy with it. And these methods that I'm using here allow me to do that. So that interior is, to all intents and purposes, finished. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to start and think about gluing some bits together. So put my paintbrush away. I have the ubiquitous Pringles lid. There's a little bit of super glue. That is the Cola 21 decent sized bottle. I've had this ages. The label's fallen off because it's actually split that one. This is the most recent one. It's been in the fridge until recently. Drop on there, that's what we're going to do. We also have some Formula 560 canopy glue for anything that's not structural. And drop on there. So I've got my glues. I'm happy. I can work now. We have this little tool which I've used for years. This is a glue applicator. It's got a ball on one end and a point on the other. Fine work and broader work. I also will now recycle the aforementioned cocktail stick for the umpteenth time. I like to get value out of my cocktail sticks because that will be used for the white glue. In my pot of bits, we have the trimmed from the backing sheet instrument foils. I have to say, I don't know about you, but there's so little detail visible on that right now from a point of view of instrument dials, it's almost pointless. They're great in 48 scale and 30-second scale, but in 70-second scale it's just a series of black dots on a bit of plastic. Is it any better than using a decal? Probably not. The instrument panels in this aircraft were, after all, matte black, so it isn't really going to show up, but it's in the kit, so we're going to use it. So put that on there for now. A little bit of the PVA, a little bit on the front panel. I am going to make the front panel up because, like I say, the bits are there, so we're going to use them. Spread it out nice and thin. It does dry quite quickly, this stuff, so you have to be reasonably quick. Get some fine tip tweezers. I'll put my teeth in, I'll try again. They are mine, I honestly. See that, can't we? That just sits in there. Now, the art is getting it roughly where you think the instrument panel is going to be. I have seen people stick these to the back of the instrument panels and wiggle about and all that lot, but you know, at the end of the day, each to their own. Do it how you want to do it. This is only a partial panel at the front because it was a twin stick aircraft, but only a rudimentary panel for the front seat. So we'll get that somewhere like. We'll give that a couple of minutes to dry. So while that's drying, we'll carefully separate the floor from the bit of double-sided tape it was stuck on. Wasn't particularly well fixed that deliberately because obviously I didn't want it to get broken. Into this piece we're going to fit the floor, so we'll use a bit of the super glue to make sure it doesn't shift. Just a few little drops here and there, and that is ready to go in place. I'm going to push it into place. Now it does actually have a very positive location because the floor has cutouts molded into it that match the strut work on the inside of the fuselage. It's so precise, it fits perfectly. Just fantastic, that is. So that's now fixed in place, theoretically. So we'll give that a moment or two to dry. One little word of advice: if you've used super glue like that, what you don't want to do is a build up here. So when it's drying, just run your back of a cocktail stick, or indeed the back of a knife blade, so something like a number 11, just run it down, give it a wipe off, just to make sure there's no build up in here which might interfere with the fit of parts later on. So this PVA is looking something like now. So we're going to repeat that PVA process here on the film, because the other thing is, of course, it will then act as almost like a varnish and be clear. More fingers and thumbs today. I don't know what's going on. Put that into place and wiggle it about until it lines up with the dials, which rather splendidly it did almost straight away. You'll notice one is white still. You can see that. That's the PVA, which is drying now. That's actually the biggest lens, so that's the one that will get a gloss in it. Repeat that process again on the front one rather. Now, a few weeks back, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about my model making. For 2020, I finished something in the region of 50 models, including some private commission stuff and some other bits and pieces that I did. What I did was I set apart my work in progress models and said, right, I'm going to finish all of them this year. Right at the beginning of lockdown in March, and I actually worked to that subject. I was very good. I said to myself, nothing new to be started until you've finished something, which I stuck to it very, as well as I possibly could. And the end result is I finished shed loads of models. But I also adopted a slightly different approach. I am a really, for want of a better word, anal modeler at times. Everything has to be just right. And I adopted a phrase that a friend of mine used of "that'll do," and "that'll do." That'll do is one of those things of, look, 99% of people can look at that and go, oh, it's lovely, and the one that doesn't will get thumped. So just build for yourself. Don't build to anybody else's standards. Build to a standard you're comfortable with. And I believe she fits now. She might not need the amputation. Let's just have a little look and see if she's done any damage to the interior in the process. It's a really tight fit with everything in that. She hasn't, so we might actually be okay. Right, okay, so let's bolt this up. You see that now? Let's try and get a decent shot of that interior. It is rather nice, isn't it? You can see how little effort it's required genuinely to get it to that standard. Is it focusing on that? It is, yeah. Beautiful thing. So, yeah, bolt it back together. Going to use some of the super glue. I'm not going to use masses of it at this point, because what I do is I will make sure that I'm dealing with closed joints along the way. So, and I'm wanting it to stay in place. I will introduce probably some thinner super glue as we go along, just to make sure that everything's filled, because then it's a filler rather than an adhesive. This is just making sure everything's bolted up. Now at this point I am going to fit the tail extension, because I found it's slightly wider than the fuselage. Again, that's possibly down to my over sanding the fuselage previously. Let's get that in the place there. Give it a little bit on the end of it. There we go. That's that. Bit of this, bit of that. Bish bash bosh, as they say. That joint on the underside's a disgrace, and I am ashamed of it, and I do apologise. It really is dreadful. You know those minutes where you're sanding away and you just suddenly think, oh, hey up, I think I've overdone that. And I had. Big style. In fact, more than big style. Appalling. Now, the advantage of this process that we're using here with the tacking glue is that I can use this as a filler to some extent. I'm going to do so there. What I don't want to happen is that I run the liquid cement, the really thin cement, in there, and it then bungs up or runs into the interior. So I'm gonna try and just put a patch of the slightly thicker glue into it first. This is just a wicking stick, so an old paintbrush stump that I dip into my bottle of super glue activator, and it will wick up joints and stuff. Now I always knew I was going to have to do some sanding work on the underside of here because I haven't got a joint on the top at all. So we're going to do, that's looking better. There we go. Oh dear. So let's just tidy off a little. Keep the bottle of activator. Now I don't know if any of you have used super glue activator before. So this is zip kicker. You want the one in the red bottle. The other one, there's another one which is designed for foam. It's not very good for use with polystyrenes. This one's the better one. That is 3 or 4 years old, that bottle, and I'm probably halfway through it. So you're not going to get through a bottle of this every 3 weeks unless you're really overusing it. I use super glue a lot as a filler nowadays, just because it's easier to sand and work with, and often its finish matches, particularly if you're working on resins, the finish, you know, the softness and mass of what you're working on. Is mass the right word? No, mass is not the right word. Density, that's the word I'm looking for. The density of the material you're working with. Again, the advantage of the super glue is I can sand it after 20 minutes, if even now. I can sand it after 2 or 3 minutes, so you just have to make sure and remember that it does build up. It's bulk to super glue, so if I'm holding 2 pieces together which have got a really fine fit, super glue's in between them, they are not going to be flush to each other unless I'm using really, really thin super glue. Speaking of which, this product is really, really thin super glue. It's also incredibly hot. It reacts very quickly. Do not splash it on your clothes, in your eyes, or on your face, or anything like that, because you're going to pay if you do. These are little super glue activator tips. You can buy them in a pack. They're by Zap again. Always use these with this because I'm going to use this as a wicking glue now. So holding the bottle with the curve upwards, just going to feed a little bit of the glue to the tip, and then I'm going to allow it to wick down that join. I don't want to put too much in, because as I say, otherwise it will flow into the interior and ruin all my good work. I have to say, looking into that interior looks absolutely fantastic. Shame you're going to see none of it, isn't it? Now there's a little bit of a join here that needs some attention, so again we'll run it forward, allow it to just wick up the join line, compress the join. By the time I finished with my finger wiping some off, which I shouldn't really do, it's done, it's set, so that's nice and fixed. That needs a little bit in there, so I'm just going to run a little bit. So the other thing is, you do, when you're doing it, rather than wicking along a joint, hold it at the end and just allow it to flow in a little bit, and then just compress it. A pair of tweezers. There we are. Look. Perfect. So down here is now set off. So we'll run a little bit more into there now, because what we did was we flooded this join with the activator previously. It should be setting off quite quickly as it goes in there, and that way we don't run the risk of it flowing through the interior of the model and spoiling all our good work. There's some very fine detail on the bottom of this. I believe there should be another one of these streaks and another one of these streaks on here, and I managed to remove them. Yeah, not annoying at all. Right, that's a bit too much there, so I've actually applied a little too much there, so we're going to drag that down with our cocktail stick into the join. So it's a case of don't try and do it all in one go. Do it in bits and you'll be happier. It's easier to deal with. In that area there is where the tail wheel goes. Don't really want to build up in there. So we'll get a finer cotton bud and just try and get any excess out of that if we can. Yep. That's coming on nicely. Let's have a little look at this. So that's actually sealed up in there. Now we still have a quite significant gap there. Now what I want to be able to do is sand that, then sand it and find that it sands in a similar way to the surrounding resin. So we're going to use a resin replicator filler. To do that, what we need is a little bit of talcum powder. And this little tool here, I bought this little tub thing, I bought that online. That's a little bit of talcum powder. Do not use this super glue for this. Use this super glue for this. If you use the really wet one, it's so hot, the fumes are awful. A few drops of that in there. Old plastic coffee stirrers, wooden ones if you can get, if you've got them, you know, the McDonald's type things. I'm pretty certain that there isn't a modeler in the land who doesn't have a stash of McDonald's coffee stirrers nowadays. Try not to make a mess, it's always a good idea. And you can stir in more or less super glue to get the consistency you want. I want quite a wet consistency at this point because I want it to flow into that groove. So there you go, you can see it's dropping in there quite nicely. The coffee stirrer actually is quite a useful thing for this job because you can use it like a blade and kind of push it into the detail, or into the groove rather. Just making sure we've got everything there. I have to say, much as it pains me, that this work I'm doing on this model with this filler is not the model's fault. It's entirely the modeler's fault. I really am not very happy with myself for that one. I'll come back to that at a later point. That super glue in the little pot, you can leave that. It'll go off in its own time, and then it should, because of the way that pot's made, it's a propylene type material, it will peel off. Now, I can leave that to set in its own time. Oops, come back into frame, sorry. Oh, let's go back out to that one. Yeah, come back. I can leave that to set in its own time, or I can just apply a little of the zip kicker again, and that will just cure everything up nicely so that it's ready for sanding almost straight away. So that fuselage is now ready, as I say, for sanding. I'm going to give it a moment or two just to set. Make sure I've got cover. I think I've got everything in that I need it to be, so I shouldn't need a further application of filler. At that point, I'm going to put that to one side for a moment or two, just to make sure it's 100% set, and then I'm going to start sanding it. So I hope that has made sense. I'm pretty certain that you're all sitting there at home going, he's a butcher. I'm not, honest. Just make sure that's got enough on that, because there was a little bit of a step there which wasn't there before, which again I think that's me trying to sort out the underside. Yeah, and a little bit of extra super glue running down the spine of that, just to make sure you've not left a groove. Isn't going to hurt, because there's not much of the spine actually visible, because once the headrest is in place and the windscreens are in place, you see very little of it. Obviously you'll remember that we actually have already removed the windscreen placements for the front, so I'm just going to give that a little skim over there because there was an air bubble. There we go. So I'll put that to one side to dry. We'll do some sanding in a little while. I'm going to have a tidy up for a minute, and I'll see you in the next part. Thanks now. Bye.